She was at a small company called OpenAI. Some of you may have heard of it. But she was the first commercial leader there, second sales hire, was there for 3 years, scaled from 2 folks to 300 people, and 10 million to about 10 billion. So she's going to give us all the tricks of how to do that for our companies. And then prior to that, she was at WalkMe as a VP of sales, where she led the org there from 50 million to 200 million. And then before that, an enterprise leader at InVision. And then before that, she was the first rep at Mixpanel. So Aliisa has seen a lot of different types of journeys, the early stage. She's seen the blitz scaling. So I'm super, super excited to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Amazing. So before we jump into like all the OpenAI stories, tell us a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, and then we jump into sort of what got you started at OpenAI.
Sure, yeah. I'm originally from New Orleans, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Really encouraged me to try new things and explore. I went to Brown in Rhode Island, which was a pretty big culture shock for me, but really fostered a love of learning and exploration. And then really sort of randomly, I was in New York senior year of college, was at some sort of charity event, some fundraiser, and I met a woman named Stacy, and she said, "What are you doing when you graduate?" And I was like, "I don't know, I haven't totally figured it out yet." She's like, "Well, come work at my startup." And I was like, I don't know, like, what is this? She's like, just come on Monday morning. So I went to Zara, I bought a suit, and I showed up Monday morning at 9 a.m., and it was full of cardboard boxes. And mind you, this is 2005, dating myself, but there weren't a lot of startups yet. That wasn't really a thing. There weren't SaaS startups. But I found one, and it was called Capital IQ. I joined answering the phone. This is pre-SDR world, so I was tech support, and basically bankers and hedge funds and private equity funds would call me when their Excel plugins were broken, and I'd troubleshoot their models, and that's how I started. But it was, it was a true SaaS startup. We ended up getting acquired by S&P. And stayed there for 5 years, got a shot in sales. I saw all the salespeople there, and I was like, that looks really fun. I want to do that. Lobbied the VP sales and said, give me a shot, and he did, and I've been in sales ever since, and I've really loved it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now let's fast forward to mid-2022. You decided to join OpenAI after WalkMe. At this point, OpenAI was a research lab with a couple of reps, no go-to-market, not even really a product. So walk us through that decision. What got you to make that decision? What got you to say yes?
Yeah, it was funny. A guy I worked with at Mixpanel called me actually in 2021 and said, I'm going to this place called OpenAI. You should come with me. And I was like, what is this? What are you talking about? And he worked on me for a year. I got to give him credit. He kept calling and finally said, can I introduce you to Sam Altman? So I met Sam February 2022. I didn't really know who he was. I watched some podcasts with him and some YouTube clips. So I was like, okay. And spent 30 minutes with him, and that guy is pretty damn compelling. And I was like, I don't know what this is yet. There's no revenue really. There's no commercial model, but it feels like there's something there. And then I think the real aha moment was I went over to a product manager's house, and she opened her laptop and she just showed me DALL-E. And there is something very visceral about DALL-E. I think we all take it for granted right now, the first image model, but the power of putting a natural language and getting out an image, I was like, I don't know what companies are going to do with this, but it seems like there's some commercial application for this technology. So anyway, I got an offer from OpenAI.
Okay, so now you're there, you joined mid-2022, and then later that year, there was this launch. You've talked about this. It was supposed to be a low-key launch, which happened to be ChatGPT. So take us back 72 hours. Take us back to the launch.
Yeah, I'll actually take you back a couple months before that.
Okay,
because
awesome. Basically
what happened is, when I first joined, we were running GPT-4. We were doing the training run. We had a countdown, 45 days, 44 days. And GPT-4 finished training in August 2022. And the thing was so much more powerful than we expected it to be that we were actually sort of afraid of it. We started using it, and we're like, oh my God, this is going to take the world off guard. Like humanity is not ready for this. And we were really, really fixated on how do we responsibly bring GPT-4 to the world. And so someone had the idea of, well, what if we did a better job of getting 3.5 out there and just learning a little bit more about how people interact with it and using that to deploy GPT-4. So this was, in our minds, just sort of like a user research exploration, just like how do people interact with this model if we like make it a little bit easier to find, a little bit easier to chat with. It was not, we were just so unprepared for the reaction. And part of it was we'd had 3.5 at that point since April. So we'd all been using it a ton. We were just so used to it. I think that we took it for granted that most people had never interacted with any of the GPT models and how shocked they would be. So we'd been talking about, okay, let's release this thing. Let's call it Chat with GPT 3.5. And it was really not a big deal in terms of releases at OpenAI. Like we were really focused on GPT-4, and this was like a side project. So I got a Slack, I think maybe the night before, just saying, FYI, we're launching this tomorrow morning. We don't expect any impact on your team. I was like, great, okay, And then we basically posted a blog post. There was no email campaign. There was no tweet. It was a blog post with a call to action buried all the way at the bottom. And somehow that thing just started getting a life of its own. And it took us like a couple days to start to figure out what was going on. I started getting texts from people that I thought were a little strange, like, oh, OpenAI is so cool, or this chat thing's really cool. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then that just started to grow and grow and grow and grow. And all of a sudden, I had this our system for inbound leads was, we had sales at OpenAI.com. It got like 5 emails a day. I would copy them, drop them in Slack, and one of the sales reps would say, I got it. So imagine how well that system scaled when we suddenly had something like 10,000 organizations a day reaching out to us. We had no Salesforce set up. We had no processes or tools to manage any inbound. We didn't even have a product we could really sell enterprises at this point. So it basically went from us just managing this tiny trickle of inbound as best we could to managing just probably the biggest deluge of inbound interest that any company has ever had. I had 4 sales reps and one was on paternity leave.
Wow.
And so yeah, basically for the next month, nobody really slept. And then we all thought, this will just die down. This is just a moment and everything's gonna go back the way it was. And then obviously, as you know, that didn't happen. We launched right before the holidays, which is not a great time to launch. Came back after the holiday break, and the demand just kept picking up and picking up and picking up. So anyway, I don't think our poor engineers didn't sleep for a month as ChatGPT just kept crashing, and we had to re-engineer our entire stack. And then I frantically had to figure out how do we satiate this massive demand we're facing from enterprise, which was not as easy as it sounds.
Totally. It sounds, on the outside looking in, it's like, oh, it's perfect. You've got all this stuff, but how do you even decide? Who do you talk to? So what did you do?
Yeah.
Because if you go back to the first 2 months.
Honestly, it took me a long time to convince OpenAI that we should go after enterprise. It feels very obvious now, but it wasn't obvious in that moment. We just had this massive consumer hit. We were so stretched on resources. We were roughly 200 people at that time. And everyone was so busy, and they were like, yeah, enterprise, whatever, we'll get to that later. I do wish in hindsight we had done it sooner, because I do think it cost us waiting that long to deploy the enterprise. And in that time, it was actually really hard, because I had the CIO or CEO of every company saying, I really want to buy ChatGPT, and I'm like, I don't have a way to sell it to you. I don't have an enterprise product to give you. I've got this consumer product that has actually no guardrails or privacy or SSO or there's no contracting around it, and then I've got our API, and good luck. And that was basically what I had to offer. So it was really uncomfortable for a long time.
Yeah. I guess hand in hand with that is pricing, which is, I know you inherited a pricing model that wasn't super scalable, and then you had to come in and figure out how to price this thing that hadn't been done before. And so talk to us about that. And so tell us, what was that journey for you at OpenAI?
Yeah, so when I first joined OpenAI, the commercial model was, for $60,000 annually, we will get on the phone and talk to you about AI for 1 hour a week. That was not very scalable. So then I thought, okay, what is a better way to sell what we're building? And it took a few iterations. We made a lot of mistakes. The first thing I tried was committed consumption, which was okay. That was a crutch that got us through a moment, saying, okay, at least if I put some sort of barrier to entry of saying commit to $25,000 in committed consumption. We know where to allocate our resources. We know who to help. We know who to give solution engineering time to. And that model worked for a little while. There were a lot of problems with committed consumption. First of all, if they don't hit their commitment, what happens? And then secondly, how do you incentivize the sales reps around that? Because the person who signs the 25K deal then hands it off to somebody, and that person's job then is to actually make sure they're consuming and they're activated. So there were a lot of challenges with the committed consumption model. Eventually, we would try a per-user model with ChatGPT. So we started at $60 a month, which was way too expensive. And we had to just keep iterating with that. Where we ultimately landed, and I think is probably the best way to deploy most of these tools, and it varies, there's different models, and there's outcomes-based, but where we landed with ChatGPT was a blend of user-based and consumption. We found that customers weren't really excited about, or especially procurement teams were not excited about a very high price per seat, even if it was predictable. They cared more about a low price per seat, even if it was unpredictable, what the overage would be on top. So we landed somewhere around $10, $15 a month per user license with baked in consumption and then overages every month. And it took us so much iterating to get there. But that's what seems to be mostly the right model right now with buyers and what we're seeing buying teams want, which back in my day in selling SaaS, I would never have wanted to go to market with something like that. Because it's just this is confusing, it's unpredictable, but I think the big difference between AI tools and SaaS is the margins are so much lower, you can't get the discounts you're used to, and they really care about the users using the product and not having shelfware. So they're like, even if I pay more for this, it's worth it to not waste compute on a user who's not using it.
How often were you experimenting with pricing, and how much were you in those early days trying to figure this out? What was that process like?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, in the early days, it was mostly just me trying to come up with models and having the team try it, and then let's get feedback and let's get in a room and see what's working and what's not. We actually ultimately, OpenAI built a whole team around this called our growth team, and that grew to a 40-person team eventually who were figuring out what is the right price point, what is the right commercial function. But when ChatGPT first came out, I remember Nick Turley was just seems like we should maybe have a higher tier because everybody's complaining about it's crashing all the time and it's low, they want better latency, and we're just getting all these calls from people saying we're willing to pay something to have ChatGPT not crash all the time, and we're like, well, how about $20? That seems right. We got a lot more scientific about it as time went on. Though we were always stuck at $20, so you're always anchored where you start.
I still remember one of our lunches where you had literally 30 minutes to eat lunch and run to an interview because you were frantically building the team, and you went from 2 to 300 at in a couple of years.
Yeah, that's about right.
And your sales team at that point didn't have quotas, no commission. So how did that evolve? And then how did you build a high-performing team, culture, incentives, given that most sales orgs come from a world of quotas and commissions, and that's what they're measured against. So I'm curious, how did you think about hiring? How did you motivate the team, given the unique setup?
Yeah, and I will say it was not a deliberate choice initially to not have sales compensate, have an on target earnings and pay commission and pay variable compensation. We just kept kicking the can down the road, mostly because it was so hard to figure out how to predict what a salesperson, what their quota should be in this environment. I will say because it was OpenAI, we could get away with it. I don't necessarily recommend this. What I tell most founders and startups is I think it's great for your first few hires. At Mixpanel, when I was the first salesperson, you couldn't give me a quota. We had couldn't even track what I was selling yet. And you don't really know what a quota should be. Most salespeople just want to win. And it's not necessarily just the paycheck they're after. They're after just winning the deals, being at the top of the leaderboard, being the best at their craft. It's not necessarily about the paycheck. That's not true for everybody. And even at OpenAI, there were people who I couldn't hire because they said the most important thing to me is my paycheck, and I've got kids' tuition and a mortgage, and I get it. That's very reasonable. So we couldn't hire everybody. But I do think, early on as founders, when you're building out your sales team, to not have a defined quota up front means that person has more ability and freedom to roll up their sleeves and be down for the cause in your company in a do things that are outside of their paycheck, like build your security questionnaire and your collateral and your legal documents and your privacy white paper, and they can do those things if they feel like it's not coming out of their paycheck to do it. So I actually think in the beginning it's a really good idea for companies. I think OpenAI went a lot further. You shouldn't have a 300-person sales team and not be paying quota or commission. We did that, and I think honestly it was more of a, like, how on earth do we set quotas? So we're so used to the old school 5x OTE. If you're paying someone $200K, you give them $1 million comp. That doesn't work anymore, And so then I was also like, how can I hire someone and tell them this is their quota? So it was more like, we're like, every quarter we'll just figure this out as we go, and we'll calibrate, and your paycheck isn't based on it. But good reps still care about the leaderboard. They still want to be at the top of the leaderboard. They still want to be winning. They still want that recognition. They want that job security, even if it's not directly tied to commission.
So what did you celebrate on the leaderboard with the team?
Yeah, so we definitely had a leaderboard of top ARR closed, biggest deal done. I also ran spiffs. I'm a big fan of spiffs. They give you so much flexibility. There's so much lower cost to deploy internally. You don't need like a whole team to manage spiffs. This is like, I don't even know what spiff stands for, but it's basically it's like a quarterly incentive bonus, and you can set them every quarter. So let's say it's June and you're like, oh man, like our retention rate's going down. We're gonna set a spiff for Q3 for, highest retention rate per rep gets a $10,000 bonus, right? Or for the CSMs. Or, like maybe we should incentivize 2-year contracts instead so we don't have to deal with this. And for every 2-year deal you sell, you get $1,000. So you could play with that. I think I had something like a $50K spiff bonus each quarter, which is a lot cheaper than managing, variable and paying that all out. So, and it was sort of like you could be very flexible quarter over quarter how you deploy those spiffs, and we change them. So I'm like a very big advocate of spiffs because they're so much more flexible.
Yeah, no, that's smart to add that in. Okay, let's talk about selling AI to the enterprises. You've talked about this, where it's not just selling a product. Like, we've come from the world of SaaS, like you're selling a product. Here it's like you're selling, there's fear around AI, there's excitement around it, there's a lot of buzz. And so what should founders know about the enterprise? What kind of mindset is the enterprise buyer in? What should founders think about as they're entering these conversations?
Yeah, it's really an interesting sales cycle, because on the one hand, every company is like, I have to AIify my company. I feel all this pressure to do it. I have all of this budget to deploy into AI tools, which is really wonderful and new. Believe me, 10 years ago selling software, they weren't like, I have all this budget for you right now. So that part is great. On the other hand, everyone is calling themselves AI. Like, every company out there is slapping AI on, and it's confusing. So these buyers are like, I don't understand what's real, I don't understand what actually is AI, and I don't trust my own instincts in figuring this out. And so they're sort of looking to you to explain this to them, to teach them, like, this is what AI is, this is why my product is actually really genuinely an AI product. This is how we're gonna save you time and produce ROI, and this is why you should go with my product and not every other company out there that's just like buzzwordy AI, which is hard, and like they feel very overwhelmed by it. The second thing is there's this real fear, and it has changed shape. Initially the fear was hallucinations. That's such a dirty word, and it's still, you guys probably hear that every now and then when you're pitching. Well, what about hallucinations? It's like sort of the boogeyman, right? And you kind of have to see these fears and treat them, honestly, and address them. Like, when they're asking about hallucinations, like, what are they really afraid of here? Are they afraid of the AI being accurate or not accurate? What's really behind the question here? And I think ultimately what it comes down to is most of these buyers are like just nervous about AI. I mean, the questions I got asked were things like, what should my kid be studying in school right now? Which is not like a question a sales rep typically gets, And so you're almost like this ambassador for a new world, a new paradigm that they're really nervous about. And you come from Silicon Valley and you're selling an AI product, and they're looking at you and they're like, tell me what I should be doing. Like, how should I be living my life? How should I be thinking about my career and my family? And it's really hard. I would tell my sales reps this, I'm like, you are ambassadors of a new paradigm. You are not just selling a tool or a product, you are selling a new way of living and moving in the world. And that is a hard thing in sales enablement to get across to your team. Like, how do you handle this? But we would do a lot around it. We would do like a lot of thought leadership. We would encourage our sales reps to go out and like do speaking engagements. And we would basically train our team around like the current events that were happening and how they should be responding to them. It wasn't perfect. It was really hard. So like you are the ambassadors of this new paradigm. You have to know everything going on. And I think one thing to keep in mind that I lived was the massive gap between the capabilities in the labs today and the average day-to-day experience of an employee. Like it is just such a massive gap. And so you have to sort of put yourself in that mindset if you're selling like, I know some of you are probably selling to AI native companies, which is different, but if you're trying to go out there in the world and sell to Bank of America, American Airlines, like it is a very, very different type of person that you're selling to who is not immersed and steeped in everything we are, and you have to meet them where they are and meet them where, see their fear, understand it, and do your best to make them feel comfortable. This is how AI can make you better, give you a superpower, make you more successful, and like they're looking to you for reassurance on that.
How do you think about, I think in general, like there's a lot of noise in market. You said sales enablement is really hard in this case. And so like, what were some tactical things that you did to help your teams keep in the know? Because I think not only are they learning a new technology, but there's also so much change happening around them. And so that's really hard to navigate. So I'm curious from tactically, like some things that, that could be applicable here.
Yeah, I mean, super tactically, we had a Slack bot basically every morning in our sales channel. It would send us a summary of like, here's everything you should know today. And then we had a guy who would sit there and be like, if you are asked these questions, here's how to answer them. Because, I mean, we were always in the news, and so like, you had to know how to respond when hard topics came up. So like very tactically, we just integrated it into Slack. Not a perfect thing, but at least then when you're on a call and someone asks a question, you can pull that up and look and try to quickly see, use an AI tool to quickly see like what the response should be. We also did, the other thing we had to do was get our salespeople to use everything that we were releasing. So we started doing build hours, we called them, and it was like Monday evenings. We'd have pizza, and basically the salespeople would all try to build things using like Codex or using new tools that we released to just make sure they understood and were comfortable and familiar with it. Because salespeople are much better at selling things when they know how to use it and like can actually tell stories about it versus just using the talking points they've been given.
Yeah, smart. I like that. I like the build hour. You've really scaled at breakneck pace. Going from 200 to 300 folks in a team in a matter of 3 years is, I can't imagine how crazy that is. And so give us some like things that happen as you're scaling at that pace, whether, I know you've talked about like inventing new roles and mid-sprint, not knowing sort of how that would evolve. But yeah, take us back to like the day-to-day of what that feels like.
The hardest thing for me was customer success. We need revenue operations. We need all of these things, but I'd hire them as roles that we had open and then just wait until everyone realized we needed that thing. The craftiest thing I did, I think, was I was like, let me just come up with a way to build a bullpen that I can pull people from because then what would happen is OpenAI would say, okay, great, we need a sales engineers, go hire 40, right? And then you're like, oh my God. Or like, we need to build a federal sales team in DC, can you hire 10 in a month? And so I had to try to see around corners, like what's the next thing we're gonna build and how do I start building a bullpen for that in advance? So I created this thing called Account Associates. And I basically went around and just found like the smartest people I could find who wanted to talk to customers and just seemed somewhat fungible, like they could do different roles. Like I hired this woman who had a MacArthur Genius Grant, and probably only OpenAI could get away with this, I don't know. I hired a bunch of like Stanford GSB grads who just wanted to work at OpenAI, and I just put them in this bullpen. I called it Account Associates. It was kind of a catch-all. And then I had people to pull from when I was like, I need to build an education team. MacArthur Genius Grant, you're perfect for this. I'm gonna put you on this team. And she's like, great, this is exactly what I wanna do. So anyway, I got very creative around how do I just like try to see 3 months in advance what insane thing I'm gonna be told I need to go do, and how do I start setting up the pathway for that now.
Wow. I'm going to take that one. Account associate.
It's good.
Catch all. I love it.
And a lot of people just want to get into AI, honestly. So like hire really smart people. Bain is one of my favorite places to hire from. They hire like really creative, extroverted, smart people. and they have these consulting backgrounds. They'll come in and they'll just like build all your collateral for you and like design all your process and systems, and they're amazing. Eventually, when you need your $10 million contracts, you want people who like are experts on the craft of selling. But in the early days, you just kind of need Jacks and Janes of all trades who are willing to roll up their sleeves, work hard, are dynamic and extroverted enough to go talk to customers, and will come work with you and give you the feedback so that you can partner together on the sales. I know not everyone agrees with me on that one, but.
I agree, because I agree with that, which is like you need intellectually curious people that are smart, resilient, excited about what you're doing, and they'll figure it out. So no, I 100% agree with you on that. You've been out of the seat now for a few quarters. You have some distance from it all. Looking back, what if you had to run it back, what would you do differently?
We made so many mistakes, but it was hard because you're sprinting, and there's so many things I wish I could go back and do differently. Like I'll give you like very small minutia things and then like very big existential things. Like we didn't put in lead scoring before we launched ChatGPT, and like, God, I wish we had, because then I just had this like sea of leads to try to navigate and manage, and it's hard, and then we like retroactively tried to deal with all of them, but it was too late. And then by the time we actually reached out to people, they'd been sitting there for 6 months. So I feel like we squandered a lot of opportunity by not just managing our leads better up front. One other thing we did that was really costly, and this is probably my fault, I felt the pull of the enterprises too much. I need a contract with you. I need someone to like come out to my company and I'll pay you millions of dollars. And I felt pulled very much in that direction. So the very first product I built when Mira finally said, okay, you can go build an enterprise product, is I built like a top of the enterprise product. That was very expensive, had very high requirements, was like white glove heavy. And then I went back down to SMB mid-market and said, let me build like a self-serve product that you can just come swipe a credit card. Well, it turned out there was way more demand for the second product than the first product. And so I think AI wasted some time. I think if we just released like a self-service mid-market product first, we could have moved a lot faster. So that was very big learning for me, is like, it's so easy to hear the noise of the big enterprises who are throwing around big budgets and like want to build for them, but it's a lot more efficient to build for the SMB and mid-market, and you can always go up market later. It's hard to come back down market after you build the premium up market offering.
Yeah.
And I have like 20 more mistakes I can give you, but those are top of mind.
No, it's super helpful. I can't imagine going to 10,000 leads with no lead scoring. That just
didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, it worked, but it was painful.
We got there, yes.
Yeah, we got there. I want to switch gears and talk about a personal topic that you've been public about. I know in 2018, you had a life-threatening pregnancy, some complications with it, cancer, went through chemotherapy with a toddler, work. How has that shaped you as a leader? And what lessons have you taken from that?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is gratitude. Just every day that I'm not in chemotherapy is a great day. So I do really wake up and just thinking like today is a gift. And I know that sounds trite and cliche, but it's true. I think the other thing is a bit of fearlessness. Like I've like really faced the scariest things anyone can face, and I got through it. There were so many scary days at OpenAI. Like there was a day I walked in and I was told the head of the Fed is coming today to talk about macroeconomic policy and the impact of AI. Alisa, you know how to talk to people. Can you go run this meeting? Like, I don't have a PhD in economics. And there were so many days like that where they were just like, you can make eye contact, and so many days like that. And you're just like, yep, I got this. And just try to get as smart as you possibly can on what you're doing and fake it till you make it and get through it, So there was a lot of terrifying things I had to do over those few years. And yeah, I think I got a lot of fearlessness, and I just put my head up and I was like, well, here we go, and we're gonna get through this. So I do think it's true that hardship builds resilience, builds toughness, builds resilience, and builds gratitude.
Last question from me. Now you're on the other side of the table where you're working with AI companies, working with AI founders, partnering with AI founders. What are you looking at? What are you excited about as you're at Accrue Capital?
Yeah, it's interesting right now hearing all the rhetoric around like SaaS-mageddon and no one's ever going to use tools again and all the app layer is just going to die. And I really don't buy that. I do think there are some software tools, some incumbents that are going to be irrelevant. But just going back to this like average employee at American Airlines, like they are not going to go whisper flow into Claude tomorrow. Like that's just not how this is going to play out. They are going to do the same things they've always done. They're going to go on their computer. They're going to use some sort of application layer to get their work done. I am still very bullish on that application layer. It might look different. Who knows? Maybe it'll end up being like skills that Claude Code accesses. But I think it's very unlikely that we have all of these enterprises like vibe coding their way into the future. So I'm still extremely excited to see AI native applications being built that solve problems for enterprise workers. I think we'll see a whole new generation of companies that really change the way most humans on Earth, which we represent such a tiny, tiny little portion of the humans on Earth interacting with computers on a day-to-day basis, how we deploy AI out to the masses. So yeah, I'm still very excited about the application layer.
What questions do folks have? I'm
very curious to know now that what you know about OpenAI and how it's getting adopted, at least in the consumer landscape. I want to give you a scenario and see what you would do if you were in that scenario. If you were to join a B2B company as the head of sales, and that B2B company focuses on businesses that are prosumers. So let's say we're targeting businesses that are working with consumers, right? And you can assume, I want to hear your opinions, but you can assume that consumer behavior is very much everybody going to GPT to do their shopping and whatnot, right? Like that's where consumers are going. With that insight, how would you think about how to approach sales? So how would you approach sales given what you know is going to happen in the next 2-3 years in terms of consumer behaviors changing? And that could be, I want to hear opinions on everything from, should we work with OpenAIs of the world differently? Should we think about designing interfaces differently that we're not thinking about, right? So yeah, hopefully that paints a picture of.
So you're selling a product to companies who are selling to consumers. And so you're helping your customers that you're selling to navigate how they're getting their product out there and market their own products. I agree with you. I think the sort of consumer discovery experience is going to change pretty dramatically. I don't know how fast it happens is the reality, but it does seem unlikely that in the future we go to like jcrew.com to like go search for a shirt, right? Like I think we're like, hey, I want a child size 10 t-shirt, and we're given options and we click through those options, probably in something like a Gemini or a ChatGPT. I do think, and this comes back to kind of what I said before, I don't think any of this happens overnight. I think that's the reality of what I've seen the last 3 years. Like after we launched ChatGPT, we're like, everything's going to change tomorrow, and it really hasn't. In some areas it has. Coding is probably the most obvious, where we've adopted very quickly. But I think most consumer habits are really, really hard to change. So I would be very aware of, geo, of the ability for these models to surface results in like a Google search, in ChatGPT. I do think more and more people are using ChatGPT. It's funny, I have this like workout class with a bunch of moms I go to once a week, and I've been going forever. And this week in the workout class, all the moms are like, I use chat to generate my real estate listings, and I use chat for my like event mock-ups. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And it was really cool because I've never heard these women talk about this before. So I'm like, okay, it's been 3 years, like we're there, which like we're getting there. It does take a while. So, what I'm saying is I would optimize for geo, I'd optimize for the models, but I wouldn't complicate it in a way that humans totally have to change their behavior in the next 12 months to make use of the tools that you're building.
That's very helpful.
I have a question about how you guys thought about usage-based pricing when you started selling to enterprise. In the very beginning, enterprises like transparency and predictability, right? And tokens even now are changing and are kind of nebulous, right? How did you pitch the idea of tokens to enterprises? How did they receive it? How much were they pushing back on, not being able to fully grasp what they were using relative to pricing, budgets, caps? It's something that, as we're shifting more and more into selling to enterprises with usage-based, we haven't really fully gotten our head around yet.
I was so much more nervous about this than I think I needed to be, and I'm curious what you're hearing. I had the exact same fears as you, where procurement teams are really not going to like unpredictability. They're not going to like the inability to forecast usage. We found that they were much more tolerant of that than paying a high fee up front. So when we went from like, hey, it's $60 per user per month versus it's $10 with a fee on top of it. They like the latter. We did add in the ability to cap users, which was often not used. But we did have to add that in as ability to control cost. I had totally similar fears, and we made it even harder for ourselves. We created a whole new thing called a credit. And even with the complexity of explaining all of that, procurement teams, we gave them the option. We said, hey, you can pay $60 a month per user, or we have this other model, and they all said, yes, I want that. So I was like exactly where you are. I didn't think that customers would want it, but they did.
Can I ask just one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Did you ever get pushback? Like they go with the second. Did you ever get pushback like month 3? It's like, holy cow, we're spending too much money. Did that happen very frequently, or how did you think about that?
Yeah, we did. So you do need to give visibility, transparency, and warnings. So you need to build things in, like when their usage goes above a certain amount, they get a notification, or when it increases by a certain percentage. The more visibility you can give them on consumption will allay those fears better up front.
A lot of the model companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, are moving into the product layer. As a sales leader, I'm curious how you thought about that, because you have, let's say, the Codex team that wants people to use more Codex, and then you might have the API sales team that wants everyone to use the API, like the Cursor, the open codes of the world. As a sales leader, how do you think about that, and how are the companies kind of navigating this internal conflict from the sales perspective?
Yeah, on the one hand, I don't think these labs can do everything. That said, there is low-hanging fruit. So if you're building something that can fairly easily be built by these tools, like a certain wrapper on top of the chat interface, an internal employee productivity tool that feels like it would be a natural add-on to ChatGPT, that feels a little bit riskier than building something that completely lives outside of the chat interface. Also, if you're building it with model switchability, model agnosticity, that is an advantage because the labs will never do that. They're not incentivized to do that.
While the rest of the world here is talking about GTM automation, GTM engineering, and it's amazing that OpenAI was on a different level altogether. But what is your view? Where is that space going? Us as startups, should we really be leaning into that? Is it too early?
Yeah, well, tell me what you mean by go-to-market engineering, because I've heard like a lot of
Everything
different
from, let's
takes
say,
on what that means.
watching signals, interpreting those signals, creating automated flows from as soon as an inbound lands, you know where they've come from, what are the different touch points, do I have full context on them? When my sales rep picks up the phone for the first time, they have full context on the customer, all the gong calls, summary in front of them. So there's a lot going on, right?
Got it. Yeah, look, I think there is a lot of room to run here. I think, Gong has been around for a while and really well adopted and is a fantastic tool. I think there's a lot of additional room for movement there when you start to extrapolate that out to revenue operations and how do we have the ability to create more reporting, get more data, act on that data a lot faster. So yeah, I'm very bullish on the idea of a sales team becoming more autonomous, more engineered, giving the sales reps push things to them instead of having them pull. Because right now the way it works is you're like, oh, I want to go find everyone who is done these 3 things in the last few weeks, and then I'm going to go send them a targeted campaign, and it takes a lot of effort that most sales reps honestly aren't going to make. So I think there's a really big opportunity for everyone in here, creating a go-to-market motion from first principles is how do I automate a lot of this and not build giant teams around it? So yeah, I think I'm very excited to see what the new go-to-market motion looks like. I don't think anyone is going to sign $1 million contract without shaking somebody's hand, but hopefully you can get your humans doing more of what they're really good at, which is get out in the field and meet people face to face and have most of the other stuff as automated as you possibly can.
My question is, you mentioned as more enterprise software companies will build agents and you don't see AI companies building software. What are the risky areas that you see enterprises may not look for AI companies, but agentic companies to adopt?
Sorry, just to play that back. So you're asking for large enterprises, how do I think they will adopt AI software?
Agentic software. Which
Agentic
functions
software.
And where do you see low risk compared to other?
Yeah, that's a good question. Pretty much every single conversation I had with a giant enterprise, they all had 2 or 3 areas they were really focused on. The most obvious is support. And I know we're seeing a lot of companies building there, and it makes sense to me because every company is spending so much money on support. And if you can offload a tiny fraction of a percentage of that, that is worth me spending a lot of money with you. So I think they're willing to take more risks there just because it is such a massive cost center. I think the thing that they're most nervous about is like AI bots on their website that talk directly to people. Like they're all very paranoid and nervous about that experiment. There have been too many bad press articles about it, so we saw a lot of fear around that. And then it honestly depends a lot for industry. One thing that really surprised me is there were certain verticals that were very, very open and willing to take bets on AI and certain that weren't. And manufacturing was one of the most, especially like industrials and heavy machinery, was way more willing to take bets on AI products early versus like retail or hospitality or travel, where there's a lot more nervousness around investing in AI. So a little bit of it is industry dependent as well.
This was awesome. Thank you, Alisa. This was truly amazing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.